Oh, hi. I'm just getting things ready here. Everyone's going to be in here in a second. Looks like you're from YouTube. Could you like and subscribe? And I'll be with you in a second. Stay afterward for a few words. I can talk more then. Bye bye. Hello, everybody. There's an actor living in your town. There's a lawyer and a bartender, too. The actor, lawyer. So, I'm doing something different today. I've decided to come out from behind the bar. It's more informal today. So, welcome. This is a Blue Boar Tavern brought to you by the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, a great group. So, look it up. There are even more episodes that our techno wizard elf has been putting on YouTube. So, check those out if you like what you see here. Our gang should be showing up soon. And I'm here out behind the bar, and but you can still pass us notes. Serve yourself. You're on the honor system. Go get your own beverages and things. Pass us notes as you walk by. Oh, there's Dorothea. Hello, and
Hey,
Phoebe.
hi there. Wait, is this a real open bar?
Tonight it is, yeah. And
Tonight
they're
it is.
just
Okay.
open the cash register and put the money you owe in. And
All right. We'll
Hey
be honest.
there.
yeah, hi, Bryan.
Good to see
So
you
I was
all.
just telling the gang here that they can pass notes, talk amongst themselves as if there is a chat function here. Um, I can't guarantee we'll get to everybody's questions or notes. Unfortunately, we're doing so well business wise here. We're getting a lot of people and a lot of feedback, so we can't keep up with it all. So thanks for being here, even if we don't get to your thoughts and questions. The rest of you, you'll notice I'm sitting with you out in front, not behind the bar tonight, because Tom is gone. Tom has left us. He's off having a life. Um, Bonner's off doing her projects, and she'll be back next time, and we miss her. So I'm playing hooky, and I'm just being lazy, and I'm going to hang out with you guys tonight.
Here's to just us.
Oh, welcome you. Welcome you to the other side of the bar, Jonathan.
Thank you. Thank
Well
you.
played.
It's nice to be here. I'll still have to do the dishes later, but that's okay. So what as long as it's just the four of us, you've been throwing out little nuggets. I don't know you guys that well beyond this. And I realized, as somebody said, we have two lawyers here and two artsy people, and I don't really hang out with lawyers. And so what about this? I mean, I wouldn't shun you or avoid you, but
Yeah, you would.
what is it that brings us together here, hanging out at
Depends on the lawyer.
Yeah. We
Tom
can do
Brady?
any lawyer checks you
obviously,
want.
Edward DeVere, lawyer slash theater person.
That's
There you
true.
go. It's true, Phoebe.
I never thought of that. Okay, so he is where we all come together. Um, so yeah, I'm a creative person, and I act and I do theater stuff and I do film stuff and I write music and draw and paint. And one thing I find frustrating at times is that a lot of scholars and critics don't really understand that creative process and how sloppy and intuitive and non-rational it can be. But then again, in Oxfordian studies, the left brain people like you guys, you obviously have a lot to contribute too. So I just can't relate to it. So I'm interested in where you guys are coming from and your background and how you got into this. So, well, it's like Elizabeth Winkler said, and emphasized when she was here last time, which was still, I think, really cool. The authorship question needs more people from more areas in it, not just the English professors. So everybody's got something to add, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's a topic that certainly attracts a lot of people with technical backgrounds. A lot of scientists, a lot of engineers, a lot of doctors, a lot of people used to doing more sort of logical analysis. I mean, I should tell you, I'm a charlatan lawyer. No, I'm actually a real lawyer. But my natural thinking process is actually intuitive. I was miserable in law school because I had to learn logical thinking. But the University of Chicago beat it into me, and now I think on both sides of my brain.
But you had to work to develop the other
I
side.
did have to work to develop the other side. I'm the person that always knew the answer, but I never knew why, and I had to
That's
then
me.
work back and do the explanation. It's like It's like in geometry, I always knew what the answer was, but then I would have to actually do the proof in order to show the teacher that I wasn't cheating. It's kind of like that.
That's really interesting to me. Like Dorothea, like how does that apply to your like in terms of knowing the answer but not knowing why? Do you work backwards from hunches, like with your research?
It's actually, it's actually something. There is actually a name for it. It's called thin slicing, and it's patterns.
Mm-hmm.
So I process by patterns, and I also am drawn to exceptions in patterns. So if I establish a pattern, and then it's like a fish scale, like all the fish scales move the same way, and there's one fish scale that doesn't, it's tweaked. That one draws my attention. And I think because I believe that the exception is the rule, right? Mm-hmm. And the rest is just window dressing. So that is a very useful way of looking at, what we know about the writer, whom I'm going to call the bard to keep from confusing names, but what we know about the bard, it's always the third gentleman is always got the most important detail in the whole play. It's those passages where he just seems that the characters are like, dribbling basketballs around each other. Like, why is this scene even here? Those scenes tend to get cut because the plays are long, particularly for modern audiences, and directors don't know what to do. But there's usually like huge amounts of information in those that pertain to Oxford or what he's really trying to say in the plays.
Like that's so interesting.
The gratuitous scenes are the ones that tell the most about him.
They do. They really do.
Huh. Huh.
And then
you,
also,
Brian?
Brian, I was going to say.
Sorry, Phoebe.
Sorry, while we were still on Dorothea, I also just wanted to say, obviously, Dorothea writes historical fiction, so is an artist and a creative in that sense. So I'm just really by the end of this hour, I'll learn more about Dorothea's like process as an artist as well as a researcher and how they kind of.
I'd forgotten that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of curious. It was, I mean, as we can all share our origin stories, but did you first get turned on to authorship in your pre-law school persona thinking, or was it after the?
I'm going to use this to set up our
set it up. Okay, here. Start with me. Okay.
Let's go around. What turned you into Oxfordian? Okay. Your process of discovery. Elevator speech.
I'm going to put up a theory that for everybody, it is 2 steps. That you have to start first with a question about Willis Stratford. Like you have to find some incongruous thing about Willis Stratford that doesn't work, or you have to be told Willis Stratford didn't write the plays, right? At which point you're like, aghast, how could that be? And then after you get used to that idea, then you start to wonder, well, okay, if that's true, who did? So it's like a 1-2.
It was actually the reverse for me, but yeah.
Okay, all right.
There we go. There goes that rule.
Okay, we'll get there. All right. So anyway, for me, it took a long time. It took a long time because my big moment, because I did it by myself and I never told anyone, and it started when I was 10. And even a child can figure this out. My mom took me to see Romeo and Juliet, the Zeffirelli film that came out, and I had a child's Shakespeare with pictures, so I knew the stories, but the language blew me away. I had never heard anything so beautiful in my entire life. And so I begged her to buy me the record, and I am old enough that these things were on records, and I played it on my little record player over and over and over and over again, and then so that all of that language is like in my head, it's still there. And then I went to the library looking for a copy of the text, and I couldn't read the text. I didn't have the patience and the capacity to wade through the text, but I did find old Vic recordings of the plays in these thick vinyl records, 3 to a packet, and I would cart them home and play them over and over and over again, play by play by play. And it's when I got to Macbeth, it was like this bell going off, Thane of Cawdor. And I go, what's a Thane? So I drag out my Webster Student Dictionary, and I'm thinking it's probably something like an earl or a duke in Scotland. And I open it up, and yes, that's what it is. And then I had this moment, and I went, wait a minute. Every story I know is about princes, kings, and queens. But this guy is writing from the high aristocracy. It's the word, of course, is point of view. I didn't know what point of view was. So at that moment, I just felt there was this disconnect. And I went and did what kids do, which is you ask your teacher, and what did she say? Don't be silly, Dorothea. Of course, Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare. And that was the age when I was learning that when people say, don't be silly, Dorothea, it means you've made a really good point and they don't know the answer. So I kind of hung on to that and I never talked about it. I was an English major in college. I couldn't write on Shakespeare because I had this nagging doubt that I never discussed with a single soul. And it wasn't until I was in my last semester reading the sonnets. I'd been in 3 Shakespeare classes because I'm still looking for the answer to this question. And reading the sonnets, the professor said, read the first 17 sonnets and come to class prepared to tell me what you think they mean. Well, of course, nobody else would talk but me. And my honors, I mean, my summa was locked up. I was in great shape. So I was like, what the heck? So I said, these poems are written from a father to an adult son, and they are telling him to have a child for a very important reason, get married and have a kid, but I don't know what it is. Is that crazy? And my professor, whose name was Richard Cody, very close to the end of his career, looks at me and says, of all the explanations I have heard, that one is the most logical, although no one knows what the poems are really about. And I was like, oh my goodness, I haven't been wrong. And so that was the process. I didn't get around to hearing about Edward de Vere probably till I was in my late 30s or early 40s when I read Beauclerk's Shakespeare's Lost Kingdom. And when I read the book.
So that sounds to me like you took the poems at face value and they made sense. And only when you, in light of Stratford, do they not make sense?
They did not make sense in light of Stratford, but Stratford had not made sense to me already since I was a kid. But I just felt really, I don't know. I mean, I felt like it wasn't something that was going to be, that I could get much traction raising. So I just kind of kept it to myself, but I always knew it. And then on a trip to Stratford, you know, and the guy in the birthplace says, if Willa Stratford went to school, he went to the, the school around the grammar school around the corner. And I was like, what do you mean if he went to school? Well, we don't know that he went to school because there are no records that he went to school. And at that point, I was like, okay, that's it. This is the wrong guy.
It's amazing. You came up with the authorship question on your own, starting at age 10. So in those college years, were you aware that there was an authorship question out there among other people or not?
Yeah, I was in my own head all the way until Richard Cody, in front of a class, right, told me, right?
That's interesting.
That's remarkable. Yeah.
Right. No.
Really precocious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Phoebe, can we go to you? What turned you into an Oxfordian and what was your whole process of getting into this mess?
Sure. Yeah. No, this is really fun. I'm excited to kind of be doing this. For me, you know, just thinking in light of what Dorothea said about the moment of questioning it. And then like, I remember being in, probably in like middle school, and we were maybe reading Romeo and Juliet, and I was excited about it, into it. And then we had those Folgers books. And then I was like, I want to learn more about who this author guy is. This is really interesting. And then I like went to the front of the book and read the biography. And I just remember it, like it slid off of my head. It was just so boring. Like there was something where I was like, there's nothing to see here. This is just weird. And I remember really being turned off, like something about that. It just felt off to me. I didn't like it. I don't know what it was, but it just felt weird. And I think that actually made me pretty disconnected from Shakespeare. Like from that point forward, like I was in some Shakespeare in college, and you know, I'm like a theater person, like more kind of musical theater and Broadway being like my background and what I'd always really loved. Like Stephen Sondheim being a real hero, like wanting to be like a librettist and a writer. And so I kind of wasn't actually that interested in Shakespeare because something about it felt weird. And then it was during the pandemic that I, on YouTube, came across a link to Hank Whittemore's solo show, Shakespeare's Treason. And I honestly hadn't thought, like, I wasn't looking for it. It kind of found me, and I was so grateful. And, this is really, I was so bored. It was such a boring, miserable, crappy time. And I think for me, I think the thread that I kind of felt was, there's like truth has a signature. There is something about the truth that when it hits you, you feel it. It has a weight to it. It has a texture. And I think what I didn't like about the cover story, the fake story, it felt off to me, even as like a young person. And I think, especially during the pandemic, when everything felt like inadequate answers and all these sort of weird, you turn on the TV and they're telling you like these sort of simple, like third grade level stuff, and you're just trying to make sense of everything that's going on in the world, and it's not adding up. And then I watched this video, and suddenly everything, I felt like I went from this almost like, Dorothy, like leaving the black and white to the Technicolor, where it was like I was in this world that felt so flat and understimulating and dull and lacking in flavor. And then suddenly it was like the world is so much more complex and vivid and alive and interesting. And I think that dimensionality and that depth and the juiciness of it hooked me, because I was like, I need to know everything there is to know about this, because it just immediately viscerally feels more true. It feels more human. It feels more realistic. And it just felt real in a way that so much around me felt like a simulation. Like I was just like feeling like so out of sorts in just like the computer screen flatness of it. So that I feel like what I think when I think about like what I love about it, what I'm so grateful for is that there is a project that I can be involved in and supporting of. Like I felt like I was so seeking of purpose or something to do with my energy or to kind of do with myself. And so that's such a gift, is, to be able to plug in and do something constructive, by which I mean, like trying to agitate and spread the word. Like it's crazy to be able to be coming in. Like it feels to me like just being around like the researchers and the scholarly community, it feels like I'm like in like, 1776, and I get to like hang out with all the founding fathers. Like it's insane. Like the level of access that I've been granted as a total neophyte, and just being able to be, like literally sitting at a literal table with, like a scholar of, like your caliber is insane. So that's weird, being early to this and the access, because I feel like so many other things that I was showing up for in my life, I was too late. Like I felt like Broadway, like the 70s was a really cool time to be like showing up on Broadway, whereas I'm pretty late for that. So that's kind of what I think about when I try and make like TikTok videos or whatever, is like I'm really trying to reach like a younger version of myself. And I try and remember how bored and unhappy I was as a kid. And I remember like Harry Potter and the Harry Potter series was like something that gave me that sense of depth, that kind of Technicolor engagement, like the richness and the saga of it. And so that immersiveness, I try and think about like, that's really, I think what my mission is like, can I find like a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old, like a younger version of myself, and before they sort of get veered off into much less wholesome, much less life-affirming, positive ways of finding stimulation, of which there is a full buffet available, even just through your phone nowadays. Like, can I try and give that person hope and excitement and this idea that there's so much to do and so much to learn, and it's so cool, and you can just access it just through reading Shakespeare and the scholarly work that's coming out of this amazing community. So yeah, it's a little bit about me.
Oh,
that's wow. I mean, what I'm struck is when you're describing that, how the traditional story just clanks, it just clanks. What's so amazing is there was a time when a lot of the leading Stratfordian, the traditional mainstream scholars, back in the days when they weren't so political about it, when they spoke more candidly and freely about their impressions of Shakespeare, they were saying the same thing. So Samuel Schoenbaum, who is a like totally orthodox mainstream scholar, but a very honest guy, very rigorous scholar, looked at the original sources. He was the one who said there's a vertiginous gap between Shakespeare, the author of these works, and this story that we've been given. It's like a vertiginous gap, which means dizzying. He literally found it dizzying. And then one of the old 19th century guys, it's one of the Furness. There's two guys named Furness. They were a father and son. I always get them mixed up. But one of these Shakespeare scholars, maybe it was Horace Furness, said something like, when he looked at the works of Shakespeare in the traditional story, he said, I cannot bring them within planetary space of each other. And these are traditionalists. These are Stratfordians saying that. so it's interesting to me that that was your reaction, Phoebe. My story is not nearly as interesting as yours, Dorothea or Phoebe. But yeah, that's amazing.
I doubt that, but yeah.
Yeah, it's not. But we'll see. I'll tell you. I know Jonathan.
Can we go into you, Brian?
Let's see what Brian's your
mine's
really
short because it's funny, Dorothea, I have loved the works of Shakespeare, at least not since I was 10. I wish I could say since I was 10, but since I was a teenager. I was fascinated by, Romeo and Juliet, certainly, and as a freshman in high school, fairly early in my teenage years, I loved Julius Caesar, Merchant of Venice. I was very lucky. I had a really good public high school in Michigan with some great teachers there. I just want to give so much credit to those teachers. I want to name them: Miss Albert, Ms. Hayner, and Mr. Parkinson and Mr. Collar. They were great teachers. And I have to say, then I went on to Stanford University, took a Shakespeare course, and was bored out of my skull. I'll tell you, my high school teachers were like 5 times better at inspiring students about Shakespeare than whatever professors Stanford University had hired to teach this stuff. Which is there's a whole interesting story there, I guess. But it never occurred to me. I was not aware. I guess I didn't pay much attention to the biographical background, so it never even entered my mind that there was an authorship question. My only memory was that I have an uncle, Uncle Bill, one of my favorite uncles. He mentioned one time, a lot of people think that Sir Francis Bacon wrote the works of Shakespeare. And I was a teenager then, and I apparently had no interest in it. So I have no memory of even reacting to that, like, oh, that's interesting, And so I was 36 years old. It was the year 2000. And I'm already a young law professor. And the U.S. News and World Report had a cover story called The Mysteries of History. And it was about several different sort of historical mysteries, one of which was the authorship question. And some of you are maybe old enough to remember U.S. News and World Report, it's the old news magazine that I don't think exists any longer, but it was like the competitor to Time and Newsweek. Yeah. And so I read that. It was quite a good article. And if anyone wants, email me, and I'm happy to circulate the copy I have. I dug up and found the article. I had saved it in my files. Short, few pages, and it talks about Roger Strittmatter's work on Oxford's Bible, the Geneva Bible, and how the underlinings in Oxford's personal Bible have an interesting, significant correlation to biblical references in the works of Shakespeare. The article sadly I don't think it even mentioned Professor Strittmatter's name, but at least it did say that a scholar has suggested blah, 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 and talked about that. And all I know is that really caught my eye. I thought, that's really interesting. And then the article said, and this Bible belonged to Edward de Vere, Earl of Oxford. I was 36 years old. I had never heard this name before in my life. I'd heard Francis Bacon, but I was unaware that anyone had ever suggested a theory about Edward de Vere. And I remember my main reaction was kind of annoyance. It was like, why haven't I heard this before? Like, why has no one told me this? This is very interesting. Why wasn't this talked about in this pathetic class I took at Stanford? And it was just, so that really caught my eye. And that was 2000. So the internet already existed. And so I think I went and looked up the website and probably came across the old Shakespeare Oxford Society website, the predecessor of Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. And there's a lot of good stuff on the website, even at that early time, a lot of great stuff. And I remember in particular, I was reading the website, and there's like a Q&A, like, FAQ, frequently asked questions. And one of the frequently asked questions is, aren't Oxfordians all a bunch of snobs? And I still recall the answer. I have no idea who drafted the answer at that time, but it said, no, we're not. Thank you very much. and went on to explain why. And I don't want to say lawyers aren't like more fair than other people. I remember thinking, well, that's a pretty ridiculous kind of accusation. And it's like, yes, Edward de Vere was an aristocrat, but if the evidence points to him to sort of say, oh, you're a snob, that's like, it just doesn't make any sense. It's like, it's just like another kind of bigotry. It's like if the evidence points somewhere, it's no answer to say, oh, this was a rich guy, so you're a snob if you think he wrote the plays.
That is actually one of the biggest ploys, right? Is to character assassinate de Vere.
And it annoyed me. It annoyed me.
Assassinate de Vere, and so much was out there, and still is out there, which is untrue when you actually start to look at his.
It totally backfired.
But it's useful because you can't, right? Stratfordians can't allow him to be a likable guy because, of course, his case for writing the plays and the poems is so terribly convincing. So it's sort of last bastion of desperateness when you start calling someone a snob. That's why he couldn't have written the plays, because he's a snob. It's like,
right. Totally backfired for me. And I never had the impression that Oxford was a nice guy. From the first time I heard about Oxford in that article, things I read, I thought, my general thinking was, this guy sounds really screwed up and kind of interesting, and sounds like he had kind of a tortured, difficult life. He was obviously born into great privilege and was in the aristocracy and all that, but many people born into great wealth and privilege are also tortured and unhappy and struggle with all the demons that anyone else might struggle with.
And to make him a complex human being, he was actually, I don't know if we focus on this enough, he was obviously well loved by a lot of people as well.
I later came to learn that, but so that was, so my work story. It was an article in the U.S. News and World Report, and why lawyers, it's funny, Dorothea was mentioning, I think when we were chatting, that you came into being a lawyer, and for you legal training was well, maybe you should explain that in more in your own words.
Painful, Bryan. Painful.
Painful. I loved going to law school. So it wasn't, for me, it wasn't painful. I guess I was always, but in my case, I've as a practicing lawyer for a few years, but I'm basically an academic. My personality, my whole desire, when I did the Myers-Briggs inventory thing, you analyze personality, I was bullseye for the teacher personality, because I just love teaching and talking about things. And when I was in elementary school, there'd be a line of kids at my desk wanting me to explain things because they noticed that I had sort of figured it out. And I think they were more comfortable having another kid explain it to them. This was during break or whatever, than the teacher. And I loved doing it. And I remember thinking, well, this is fun. It was so anyway. And in law school, I remember one of my law school classmates said, Bryan, the way you explain things makes a lot more sense than the way the professor explained it.
That's why you write such good books on this.
So anyway.
I want to hear about Jonathan's, but I think just like summing up right now, I just feel like there's something encouraging, or at least like I personally get really frustrated feeling like, I want to have a broader reach. Why don't more people know about this? But it's like, it's important to remember that even something like that article or the mysteries of history or whatever, it's like, if you're reaching one person, it could be a Dorothea Dickerman, it could be a Bryan Wildenthal, you know what I mean? It could be me. So it's like, I feel like that's, in terms of the advantages that we have over the academy or like the establishment, it's like, I think they're complacent, or the problem when you have something to defend, or the institution, they're not thinking about individual people. Whereas I think our strength is that we can, the individual matters. And so that's what it mattered to me, is that there was something that I could do. You know what I mean? I can't contribute to Stratfordianism. Like, maybe I could I can hold the guest book at the Birthplace Trust Museum or whatever, but this is a lot more fun.
A bunch of lies, yeah.
A bunch of lies.
Bryan, this just came up. Somebody asked, could you post your email, or maybe later in the show, so they can request a copy of that U.S. News?
Sure. Yeah. My email, and I'm not, if you just Google, but you'll find my email address. It's all over the place, because I've got a blog I finally started in July, but my email is just bryanw@gmail.com. I was an early Gmail user, and it's actually been a pain in the neck because a lot of people seem to think that's their email address. Anyone named Bryan is on Gmail. They type it in quickly and they think it's theirs, but it's Bryan with a Y, BRYANW @gmail. Simple as that.
Gmail.com. I'm typing it into as if we have a type chat function here. Gmail.com.
Maybe you got the computer from behind the bar.
Yeah, it's my cell phone that I have here.
Oh, okay. All right. So our bartender.
So, okay. Some of what you guys are saying is just ringing such a bell, especially Phoebe, about, then it strikes me, and you as an early intuitive Dorothea who got off on the wrong track with that. But I always had this same gut feeling as something doesn't ring true. And I love that, and I've even been thinking about this. There's something about truth that just hits something in a gut feeling level in people. And if it's not there, it feels off. So, but for me, I remember initially liking Shakespeare a lot and reading on my own A Midsummer Night's Dream, and that really hit me. I think I saw the movie first, and that brought me to the script. And but then learning about the biography of Stratford guy put me off, kind of. And it was like, especially I remember learning about the sonnets, and it was, well, these were just poetic exercises he did to show off to his friends and make money and get patronage. And I'm like, well, if he didn't care about it, why should I? So that put me off, the initial liking for it. So what little key points, I remember watching the Frontline episode on PBS where they went into this. But I didn't know much. I remember seeing Charlton Ogburn talking about Oxford on it. But I was still in that, because why should we know otherwise? That state of mind, well, his name's on the book. So how can you question it? Later on, a few years later, I got the Atlantic Monthly article that went into this, and Tom Bethel, I think was his name, back and forth. And that's where I started getting a sense of Oxford, I think, as a person. And it's like, oh, okay, something feels like you said, Phoebe, something's true here. Just, it feels right. It feels like a real human being. So that got me into it. So I went and got Charlton Ogburn's book, and literally that is a book that kept me up all night because I literally could not put it down. And I don't know if people even read that much anymore because we've moved on so much from it. I'd like to go back and read it. I think I've talked here before. Then I stalked Charlton Ogburn. And his wife actually took me in for an hour off the street, and were very nice, and they liked me, and we stayed pen pals or pen friends for the last year or two of his life. No, I didn't really stalk him like scarily or anything, but I did go visit him. But I think, so that's the initial beginning, but over time, what has cemented it more and more for me is, like I said, I'm a creative person. And that's like for the past 30 years, that's my circle, as actors and writers, and some of them playwrights and directors and musicians and composers and songwriters and artists. So I look at the story of Stratford guy as he's presented, and it's like, Sesame Street is one of these things is not like the other. It's like, he wouldn't fit into this circle. I mean, these are the people I know well, and he's not one of them. So it's like, okay, he doesn't fit. And also I'm trained in psychotherapy. I have a license in that. So not only does the Stratford guy story as it's presented, he doesn't ring true as a real creative person. He doesn't even ring true as a real human being. No, I'm supposed to know how human beings work on the inside, and I'm good at that. It's an intuitive thing. Actually, what you said, Dorothea, struck me as and when I was in graduate school for therapy, I had a professor. I almost always agreed with her, and everyone respected her. But she said, well, my way of reaching a conclusion, Jonathan and I always agree, but I go step by step to this conclusion, whereas Jonathan just leaps right to the end.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's my way of doing it. So it's that gut feeling thing, like you were talking about, Phoebe, is this feels right. This feels true. I can't explain it necessarily, but just something is off or it's lining up.
Well, it's funny. I keep thinking as you're talking, like, I think all of us have alluded to this sense of like the signature of truth. And then I'm thinking, the vero nihil verius, like which I've heard translated numerous different ways, but I don't know, maybe push back somebody if I'm wrong, but nothing is truer than truth or something as the De Vere motto. And I feel like maybe that's kind of what it's alluding to. Like there is this thing that nothing is truer than what's actually true, and you can't disguise it. And then when you see something like the Droeshout, portrait, you look at this and you're like, yeah, this doesn't feel truer than truth.
So Jonathan, do you talk about this with your actor friends, creative friends, artist friends?
The big Shakespeare fan ones, not much. I mean, they know, but they respect me, and one has come to the point of, oh, it's an interesting. I'm not convinced, but it's an interesting thing to hear about. That's good.
Also accepted not accepted necessarily as part of the discussion in your artistic community.
Yeah, I guess it's like anywhere. I don't know. That's a hard question to answer now that I think of it. I guess it would be the same with anyone. I think when it's like you feel people out when they're open to it, then you feel free to talk about it more. But I also don't want to be one of those obnoxious people like forcing it on people. And I think, I've opened up quite a few people to it because they respect me and know I'm not a nut. So, if Jonathan is open to this, then there might be something to it, and they start listening. And
how about the Lewis Carroll folks, the Charles Ludwig's daughter, Lewis Carroll double mirror.
Yeah, you've heard about it. You've heard about this recently. Yeah. Because, you look to tie it into the same thing. You look at other writers; they ring true. You look at Ben Jonson's life and documents; he rings true as a writer. John Donne, yes. Moving it on, Lewis Carroll, yes. Charles Dickens, yes, he rings true as a writer. Stratford guy, and no, something's not right. You've heard the story, Dorothea, but I'll bring it up again. Years ago, I was at a Lewis Carroll Society meeting in San Francisco, and there was this little group there of people who believed that Queen Victoria was the secret author of Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. Yeah, really. So they were invited, and they came and they gave their presentation, and they presented their case, and we all listened nicely, and they went away, and no one has ever heard from them since. And as I tell the Stratfordian people, that's what you can do when you're really secure in your authorship position. Carolians don't feel a need to constantly bring up these Charles Dodson doubters to bash them. They just don't give them a second thought because they have the evidence to back up Charles Dodson as Lewis Carroll. They have all the biographical stuff. They have all the documentary stuff. So they can ignore these genuine crackpots that the Stratfordians try to paint us as. So Carolians aren't obsessed with bashing doubters. They just don't enter into their mind.
It's funny. It's like what I think about, or what I'm kind of, as I attempt to think about how to like share this with more people. I've had a very different experience in terms of most of the people, just like in my social circle or people that I encounter, have they're like totally interested. They show up totally open to it because they have no opinion about Shakespeare because they haven't read it and they haven't been exposed to it. And so that is like, on the one hand, like the good news for like, it's crazy. Like, so that's what I feel like I can really offer people, and like, especially young people and that's the tragedy of generation, is that it really has shifted where people of my generation and younger haven't read Shakespeare. It's some really old guy. They've heard of Romeo and Juliet because like Taylor Swift wrote a lyric about it at one point. And it's a tragedy. And so that's part of why I'm like optimistic that I feel like Edward de Vere's like ghost is going to come, and like, I feel like at this point he really wants his story told because his works, this idea that he was supposed to, even if his name is buried, his works are going to survive. That transmission isn't happening now. And so part of me feels like what I can offer young people is they're like, yeah, most people get really defensive. Not when I mention Shakespeare to them, they get nervous because they're like, oh, this is some like, galaxy brain stuff. Like, I don't know. That's not my thing. Well, people are just nervous to even engage with it. And so what I say is that the authorship is actually your bridge to connect with Shakespeare. And it's going to give you this amazing gift that you feel is beyond you or it's inaccessible to you. But in fact, at least for me, is this like Rosetta Stone that unlocks modernity and the comparisons between the Elizabethan period and today, pseudonymity, the way that politics interrelated with literature, like all of that not only makes this literature, the context unlocks the literature, and the literature unlocks the world. And so that's what I feel like I can promise people and offer them. And I'm because people are just impoverished without this cultural touchstone, I'm more warmly received, not by like journalists and powerful people, but like normal people my age.
I think what you were saying there, it connects back again to that theme of truth and finding a real human being behind it. And suddenly it's not so intimidating because there's a human connection. I was thinking of some metaphors and the Stratfordian baloney that I just can't buy. Is like, one thing they say, a bit of baloney, oh, he was an actor, so that allowed him to hide himself in his works. And that's not how it works. That's not acting. Acting isn't a concealing thing, it's a revealing thing. So the way you act in a way that really moves people, it's got to be real in there. And I always have this image of like a tuning fork, like it's set to a frequency. And if you set this one going, wah, this one over here will start wobbling and they'll start reinforcing each other. And I say that's what acting is like, is if you find something true in you, so actors, if it's not in there, they can't convey it.
You are, and what's fascinating though is they would say that. They would say an actor could, like you say, conceal themselves, but they wouldn't take it a further step and note that an actor also is taking on a persona. You're trying to convince someone that you are someone who you're not literally, and you'd think it would occur to them that, oh, could that resonate with an author who's concealing his or her identity? I mean, that seems so obvious to me. So yeah, I sometimes wonder if the defenders of something about the traditional theory causes people to have just basic failures of logic. I mean, they don't seem to connect the dots in a way, and I don't think it's not that they're lack the capacity. There's something about this insistence on this traditional theory that sort of dumbs down the whole conversation, and that people who get too fixated on the traditional theory are risking not seeing the forest for the trees. Yeah. I'm also haunted this idea, you said, Phoebe, or Jonathan was saying that, he felt like when he was told the traditional story, if this author didn't care about his works, why should I? Classic kind of teenage response. And Phoebe mentioned saying that, your sense is that younger people now are just less connected. They're not, Shakespeare isn't something they're just imbibing as part of the general culture. And that's frightening, because if this author's works fade out of awareness, then that is a terrible loss. But I'm haunted by the question of how many other students have been turned off from Shakespeare by this traditional story. As both Jonathan and Phoebe have said in different ways, the way it's traditionally taught and the insistence on this very implausible traditional story, it's just a total turnoff. It clanks. It doesn't make intuitive sense. It's not inspiring. It just doesn't fit together. And kids and teenagers, they can smell that a mile away, and they're like, it's just total turnoff. How tragic! It's and I think that even tragic.
For me, I think the depth of the gaslighting, which is this big cultural touchstone right now, and that's another, I think, advantage that Oxfordians have, is that we are in this moment where young people are very critical in that, like, everything's being reevaluated, in terms of like the classics and the canon, and some of it's like problematized through like a political reference, but everything is like nothing's taken at face value. Everything sort of gets the spin. But for me, even just like, I'm sorry, but some of the content of the plays without context is boring. Some of it isn't funny if you don't get that it's making fun of Philip Sidney. Like, there are some passages that if you don't know what they're talking about are just baffling and long. Like, for me, when I try in my like elevator pitch or whatever to people of why do you care about Oxfordianism, is like, I talk about the scene in Merchant of Venice where it's like the second scene and it's with the caskets, and Portia is trying to choose the husband, and it's like these suitors, and then Portia and Nerissa are making all these jokes going on and on about all these different like suitors, mocking them. And I'm sorry, but it doesn't land. Like, some of it is funny, and like, you can, if the actors are on stage and they're working and they're hustling and they're chewing the scenery basically.
That reminds me of Kenneth Branagh has said there's nothing less funny than a Shakespeare clown.
Exactly. Right. No, and so it's like you're
You have to
sitting and
kill
it's like, so
yourself.
you're
Yeah.
sitting as a teenager and you're like, wait, so people in the Elizabethan period were just sitting like watching, like grown-ups were sitting and watching this long scene where there's like a lady choosing between three princes or something. And it's like, huh? But then if you actually understand that it's a political allegory, you're basically watching a presidential debate on stage and you're watching this like very high stakes blood sport. And it, you know what I mean? Then it starts to make sense. But it's like you're asking teenagers to sit through stuff that literally doesn't make sense without the context. You're giving somebody like, you know, just like you're giving them the text without the cipher, you know, the cipher without the key. So you know, and I'm also, Bryan, just to like what you're saying about the kind of the tragedy of like what's lost and what isn't a part of the general culture, like not to be all like, I mean, I am very pessimistic and depressed about, like, I feel like my grandparents' generation, like they were even just going to like public school in Queens, like in New York, like they got so much. Whereas it's like, I went to whatever fancy schools, like, you know, I went to Brown and I got nothing, like in terms of being, you know, having read stuff. But like, there's an episode of Seinfeld that is basically Jerry's like cheating on his barber. And so it's like kind of like playing on the Barber of Seville. And so you hear like the opera music and it kind of is like, you know, it sort of follows the plot of the Barber of Seville, but it's goofy because it's Jerry and Kramer and he's cheating on his barber. For me, I didn't even get what the joke was. You know, the idea that there's an episode of Seinfeld, like one of the most popular, like kind of mainstream TV shows, like for that, you know, like even my parents who are like didn't like opera, everybody gets the Barber of Seville. Like it's assumed that you can do an NBC show that references the Barber of Seville. I don't think nowadays a show on NBC or Hulu or Netflix that was catered to as broad an audience as Seinfeld hit would be like, yeah, we can do an episode about the Barber of Seville. You know what I mean? Like there's just been this brain drain, or it's like the funnel of what's actually being passed down is there's loss, there's brain drain. It's much more mid-brow, frankly.
So Phoebe, I'm sort of curious, like what is fascinating to you right now? The most fascinating couple of things in the many fascinating couple of things.
Well, Dorothea, I don't want to seem like I'm pandering, but I certainly am a huge fan of your work. I love the
pander, brown nose.
I'm sorry, but like I love the romance stuff. I love the boyfriend girlfriend stuff. Like I'm always trying to figure out like kind of what was going on in the interpersonal dynamics and the affairs of the heart. I love, you know, Robert Prechter's research just in terms of its like stamina and the hugeness of it, and the scope of, you know, all these other pseudonyms that Edward de Vere was writing under at the time, and these crazy sock puppet games that he was playing, and that it's so much more complicated and crazy, and this like hydra sprouting a gazillion heads everywhere you look. I guess that kind of speaks to the complexity and the depth of it. You know what I mean? That he isn't just writing this one pseudonym. It's this craziest, most prolific, crazy guy, where it's curlicues and turtles all the way down. Like these
and doing great cross marketing of himself under different personae. I mean, that's sort of the brilliance of it. You know, you create multiple personae and then you talk about your other personae. It's fabulous marketing.
It's insane.
Just to let people know, the writer of this book on this is going to be joining us in about a month.
Yeah, that I'm really looking forward to that, because
right here,
a lot of us. I mean, Bob Prechter has written a lot of fascinating stuff. Brilliant guy, and so we're definitely looking forward to that. Yeah,
but I think for me, what I find the most exciting is honestly the ambition, like getting to meet people that are doing original scholarship and research. Like I thought that, no offense, like I don't know who I'm offending. I thought everybody who was doing cool work like this was dead. I thought there was no opportunity to be able to No, like just the fact that you can be on the first. I mean, Alexander Waugh blows me away. Like you can be this like Indiana Jones style like person who's researching, and just the virtuosity and the incredible. Like there's so many names I want to drop now. I don't want to. Bonner is amazing. Earl is amazing. Like all these people that are on the front lines and they're making these original discoveries. It to me it's just like straight into my veins. It's so invigorating. I think those are themes that I'm struggling with in general. One is like, are we living in the end of history, and is everything cool already over, and what can I do besides just be like a consumer and like sit on my like phone all day, and like what can I do with this like energy that I feel like I have, and how can I try and be living a life that feels meaningful? And so I think that for me is what's made me addicted to this community and this cause. Two
questions that came up here, and I think it'll lead to a second question. We are going to go around quickly in our last 10-15 minutes, but somebody says, Phoebe, where can I find your videos?
So my videos are on TikTok. I'm at Phoebe_DeVere on TikTok. I also have a couple on YouTube as well as at Phoebe DeVere. Right now, I'm trying to really invest and grind in TikTok and see if I can kind of level up there. Build more of a younger community because it's more it's social media. So whatever. I don't need to get into that. I want to talk more with other people, but yeah, right now I'm doing a video every day on TikTok. But
you've got a website. You have a website too, right? Phoebe?
Oh, rejectshakespeare.com.
Yeah, that link. I think I went to that. Doesn't that link to a lot of the videos and TikToks?
Yeah, I made that to be sort of like, well, I mean, honestly, it's sort of to the point of the sock puppets. Like I have this, I have basically a bunch of friends and I make them dress up in Edward de Vere merch and take big group photos. And then I put the photos on websites and then I say we have a club, but then they keep coming. So the club is real, but it started as like a fake sock.
You fake, you phony. You're all image and no substance.
Yeah, I don't know. So that's rejectshakespeare.com. I just wanted it to be, that is the Edward de Vere Truther Society's homepage. Not a lot of updating happening there, but I am doing new videos every day on the TikTok, and I'll hopefully get back to YouTube. I would love to do more long form interviews on the YouTube channel with scholars. I just need to figure out like the technical elements of that, but I would love to have it be, I mean, I know that the SOF is already doing that, but I would love to just like ask my questions to scholars as well on the YouTube, but right now it's happening on TikTok.
Okay, and there's a question here that somebody aimed to both Phoebe and Bryan, and there was an earlier one for Bryan, which might lead into this like next round. But this was Phoebe and Bryan. I'm not quite sure what this means. Has Oxford, as an author, drawn any teenagers to Shakespeare unless switching from first being Stratfordians? Is there like, I don't know if that means like, have they like,
I think some on TikTok, I hope, I don't want to give myself too much credit, but I hope and pray that there are at least a handful of teenagers out there who've come across my videos on TikTok and maybe had no exposure or really depth of any interest in Shakespeare. And that's what I'm doing it for. That's my hope, is that there are at least a few out there who saw my videos and got interested in Oxfordianism. And that's been the portal into Shakespeare. If I've done that with one person, I feel like I've done a really good thing.
I think, I think it's possible now in a way it wasn't, to bypass Stratford altogether.
Absolutely. People are like, huh? What?
Any thoughts,
that's
Bryan?
The thing.
Somebody aimed that at you too, Bryan.
What is so weird? Sorry. Go ahead, Bryan.
Yeah, I mean, I can't cite any specific examples, but I think our secret weapon now, the internet, with all of its downsides, and it's a mixed bag, but it gives all of us direct access to our fellow people. You can communicate with people, and if you can get their interest, I think, of course, there's a lot of garbage on the internet. We all know that. And so it's like, how do people wade through all the fake stuff and find what's real and worthwhile? I think people, given time, if they pay attention, they listen, they look at videos, I think most people have a good common sense ability to sniff out who is BSing them and who is coming from a place of sincerity. And without patting ourselves on the back too much, I think as soon as I got involved in the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship and went to conferences and all that, I thought, these are really interesting people, and some of them are as eccentric as some of my aunts and uncles or my relatives are. And so it's not like all of us are necessarily, so some of us are oddballs maybe, but we're sincere. And you sit down and talk at these conferences and you realize, wow, there's a lot of really educated, thoughtful, successful people who are really interested in this. And my gosh, they're not all crazy. In fact, hardly any of them are crazy. These are like real people, and you can just tell that we're sincere. We could be mistaken. So what I often tell people in my local San Diego Shakespeare Society, which is surprisingly open and really quite friendly and open to doubters, not that we've persuaded most of them to be doubters yet, but they're very friendly and open to it. Maybe it's the laid back San Diego attitude or something. But I always say, look, we could be wrong. I could be mistaken. I could be wrong. But I'm coming at this as someone who loves Shakespeare. I'm fascinated by Shakespeare. And these are serious, reasonable questions. And I've been encouraged. Most of the people I know who don't know a lot about the authorship question, my fellow professors, lawyers, like the dean of my law school and stuff, when they looked at this stuff, they said, "Oh, wow, this sounds really interesting. What you're into, Bryan." And I said, I kind of laugh and I say, "I'm glad you react that way, because a lot of these people, they call us snobs. They compare us to Holocaust deniers and
Talk about phony
anti-vaxxers."
baloney.
I know. And what's funny is, and I mentioned that, and a lot of these people, and I remember my dean was like, "What?" She was like horrified. She says, "You're kidding. They say things like that." And I was like, "Oh, you're so naive." It's like, let me tell you all the stories. And they're really shocked. People who don't know about the authorship debate, when they hear about the kind of vitriol and stereotypes that some, not all certainly, but some, defenders of the traditional view vent on us, it really backfires on the traditionalists, and it makes us look like it makes us look more sympathetic, because anyone who knows us knows that we're on a sincere journey to try to understand this writer who simply means so much to us and has spoken so strongly to all of us.
Actually, something you wrote, Bryan, set me off on a new line of thought that has influenced me. And then I still have another question for you that I think you'll be able to answer quickly, and it will lead into this. But you had written on your blog a little thing looking at some of the reviews of Elizabeth Winkler's book. And there was one of them, I don't remember who it was by, but it's the first time I saw a Stratfordian acknowledge this, where it's like, I think she was whining about, well, we can't ignore Oxfordians because then they'll spread all this stuff, but every time we attack them now, it makes us look bad. And it's like, oh, they're getting it. Okay.
They're well aware of it.
I think it's starting to spread through it's hurting them.
It can't go on. I don't know what is going to be the breaking point, but I feel like we are so close to it. First of all, I don't even understand why the vested interests are to continue to suppress the Oxfordian theory. Like, it feels like, I don't even think they remember why they're supposed to keep, but I just feel like this is the note I'll end on, which is optimistic, which is like, at the last year in Ashland, they did the documentary that the twins had done. I forget what it's called, but they screened it and it was great. And that was the one that Roland Emmerich, who did the Anonymous movie, had written a blank check for, hoping to release the Anonymous movie simultaneous with this.
Last Will and Testament.
Yeah, Last Will and Testament.
Yeah, Lisa Wilson and Laura Wilson are wonderful filmmakers. Yeah.
Yeah, they're great. No, and so I asked them, or I don't know if I asked them or if they were just speaking to it, of like, what was it they felt like it didn't catch fire in the way that it was supposed to, and clearly, like, Roland Emmerich was trying in 2012 or whatever to instigate this sort of like moment, and really was optimistic that it was worth spending his money to do so. And they were saying, well, I think we were a few years too early, which is to say that this was right before like YouTube and like Twitter and all these things were present. And I think nowadays, if those resources had been available online as this sort of parallel kind of like water cooler thing where there's all this like ferment and people are exchanging ideas, like if it had been in that climate, it would have caught more of a wave. And so I feel like the next time something like that happens, and it has to happen soon, and I think they're making huge tactical errors. Again, talk about phony baloney. Like, they just keep calling it like racist to question who wrote Shakespeare or something. Like, they're just running out of stuff.
Classist.
And
whatever, Holocaust denialism. It's like questioning, like saying Elizabeth Winkler is like somebody who would question Obama's citizenship status. Like, give me a break, folks. Like, they're overplaying their hand. They're out of tricks.
It's turning against them. Okay, quick question for you. And I hope our technical fairy here is going to let us go 5 minutes over, maybe, because but somebody had asked you, Bryan, and this ties into an anecdote I have. Have you ever been in contact with Stanley Wells about your book about early allusions to Shakespeare doubting? And I bet no.
I mean, in the few occasions that many of us have tried to contact some of these leading professors, they just don't respond typically. I personally haven't made a specific outreach because I've heard so many stories from other people who said there's no point, they don't respond. I do keep thinking that might be a good avenue. I know, for example, that one author, James Marino, who's a very bright professor at Cleveland State, who's written a great book about Shakespeare, which I praise in my book. I tell people to buy the book. he's a traditionalist, a Stratfordian, and I happen to be very good friends with another professor at Cleveland State in a different department, and she knows him. And so at some point, it's like, yeah, let's go out to coffee sometime, and we talk about this like civilized people, because there's a lot of good work being done by the traditional mainstream academics. These are very bright people. They're very well informed about Shakespeare. The main problem is they're not interested in the authorship question, and they know a lot about the works of Shakespeare, but they don't really know much about the evidence on authorship because they just don't care about it. They push it aside. They reject the legitimacy of the question. And so they literally don't know what they don't know about that. But they have a lot to teach us, and we need to listen to them and read what they write, because they know a heck of a lot about Shakespeare in other ways also. So as an academic, I'm a big believer that we've got to try to listen to each other respectfully, read each other's work respectfully, recognize that all of us could be wrong about a lot of different issues. And hopefully we can go forward in a way that just explores this fascinating question. And it's like you were saying, Phoebe, too, like, is everything been resolved? I find it kind of reassuring that clearly there are just some very fascinating mysteries of Elizabethan England from 400 years ago that we have not yet figured out. And so that's kind of nice to know that there are still some mysteries of history that we've yet to completely crack, even though I think we have made some pretty good progress on Oxford.
Totally.
I'm going to do a round here. We'll have to give very short answers because it was another question that came up originally. But asking, and I'll start because I'm going to tie it right into yours, Bryan. What particular aspects of Oxfordianism are interesting to you as an individual? For me, it's going back to what feels true about creative people and all that. So for me, that ties into, I call them autobiographical elements. I don't think necessarily that Shakespeare's sitting there, Edward de Vere, saying, I am going to write my autobiography into this. In some places I think maybe, but creative people can't help but leave their fingerprints all over their stuff. So this idea that, he left no trace of himself in his works, that's impossible. I mean, no human being could do that because it comes out of your mind and everything you've experienced. That's what creativity is. All your experiences, all your exposures, you just rearrange them and jumble them up in new ways, but you can't make up something. So I read Stanley Wells once was being snooty and saying, well, Oxfordians obviously don't understand imagination, and obviously they've never read The Lord of the Rings or Alice in Wonderland. And I'm like, well, actually, I know quite a lot about those books and those others. So I wrote him a letter and spelled out all the autobiographical elements in those books, showing how only those two specific individuals with those two specific individual lives could have written those fantasy imagination books. Never heard a thing back, of course. But that's for me. I'm interested in the history that ties it to a real person and the autobiographical elements.
I think we shouldn't bang our heads too much on the wall of trying to change the minds of these older professors. I would say, like Lisa, let's aim for the students. Let's aim for high school students and college students who are just potentially discovering Shakespeare. Let's try to turn them on to what an incredibly exciting, messy, complex, and fascinating writer this was. I mean, he's not perfect. He's not politically correct. There's a lot to be offended in the works of Shakespeare, but they will grab you, and you can't forget these poems and these plays once you've experience them.
Yeah. Dorothea, what aspects are you most interested in personally?
Oh, gee, only a few.
In like one sentence, 5 words.
Oh, I can't do it in 1 second.
Go.
Because I think the entire canon is actually an instruction book on how to be a good king. So that each and every play that is in there is written for the benefit of his son. That's actually what I think, that all of the history plays are bringing up the history of England and demonstrating what's a good king and a bad king, characteristics that make for good leadership versus bad leadership. That's a sort of overarching. Also, because I think the women in Oxford's life, particularly around the backdrop of some really repressive law as a lawyer, I have a hard time with English law. You're either your father's property or your husband's, and if you have those restrictions around you, and you are fortunate enough to run into Edward de Vere, the truth is he's not a misogynist. He's actually a feminist. And I know that's a lot of the things that I explore. And finally, I think the real estate lawyer in me, because I always insisted on site visits for every single project I worked on, including for all the associates who worked on me, because I would say you could be looking at papers on your desk, but until you go look at the place itself, you don't really understand what's going on there. So I enjoy a sort of literary tourism as well, which I try to bring through with lectures and podcasts.
And Phoebe, any short special aspects that are particularly of interest to you?
I think I probably already answered the question.
Okay.
But yeah, just the vitality of the movement and an opportunity to be a part of something that's growing.
Good. Get lost, everyone. Go away. We're closed. No, I'm kidding. Thank you so much, everyone.
This has been fun. I really feel like I've got
joining you down here. And thank you, everyone, for watching and listening in and throwing out your thoughts too.
Great to get to know all of you a little bit better. I feel this is fascinating. Yeah.
Same. Really a pleasure. Honored.
Hi. So, you came to help with the dishes and clean up, huh? We've got a lot of stuff here, and you're not here to volunteer to help, but you want to learn more about how you can support the Blue Boar Tavern. Okay, that is good. The best way is there's a like and subscribe button there by the door. So on your way out, just be sure to press those. Another thing you can do is you can actually go to our website, the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship.org, and that will show you tons of new information, things you may not know, whether you're a brand new person, have been with us for years, essays, video links, past Blue Boar Tavern episodes. It's all there. If you're not a member already, you can sign up. If you're not ready to sign up, at least get on our email list to get all the latest email news from the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. And that will include monthly links to the Blue Boar Tavern, so you can participate live by passing us notes and asking us questions and generally joining in. So thanks for joining us. I better get to work. There's a lot of dishes back there. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Like and subscribe. Bye-bye.